Okay guys, so today we're going to learn about lipids. Lipids are more commonly known as fats. So when someone says fats, they're referring to a class of macromolecules called lipids. Remember, there's four different types of macromolecules. There's carbs, there's protein, there's lipids, and there's nucleic acids. And basically, we're going through each of them. You have a day or two of lessons on each of them. We did carbs yesterday. Today we're doing lipids. Tomorrow's proteins, and next week is nucleic acids. So lipids, generally, if you look over here at these structures, generally lipids will have kind of what's called a long hydrocarbon tail, and they can be all different lengths, so different types of lipids, and these are called fatty acids. Lipids are made from fatty acids, kind of like if you remember that carbohydrates, we had the monosaccharides, which was just like the one unit, the simple sugar, and then they would link together and they would make polysaccharides, right? So there was building blocks. Each monosaccharide could link together to form bigger molecules called the polysaccharide. Kind of like fats, these are the building blocks called fatty acids. Fatty acids are the building blocks, and then they can kind of come together with some other stuff and they make the complete lipid. So generally though, fatty acids and lipids in general are characterized by these long hydrocarbon tails. Because you can see that's exactly what it is. Hydrocarbon, right? Hydrogen, lots of hydrogen. Carbon, there's lots of carbon. It's a tail, kind of looks like a tail made from hydrogen and carbon. And then notice up here, there is what's called the head group. So that's part that's not the hydrocarbon tail. So there's kind of two parts of a fatty acids. These are called fatty acids. I'll write that down. Fatty acids. There's two parts. We have the head group here and then the hydrocarbon tail, the tail group. Now the head is polar. The head group is polar. And hopefully you remember what polar is. We talked about this a lot with water. Remember, polar is a molecule, is a part that has a charge. It has a slight positive or negative charge. So the polar group has a slight charge on it. The tail, the hydrocarbon tail, is nonpolar. So this whole thing here is nonpolar. Alright, so there's no charge on that hydrocarbon tail. Now that's really important when it comes to cell membrane formation, and we'll look at the picture below this in a second and talk about that. But it's important to remember the head group is polar, the tail group is nonpolar. So another name for that we haven't gone over yet is hydrophobic and hydrophilic. So the head group is polar. We can also describe it as hydrophilic. Hydrophilic. And that means it likes water. It likes to be around water. It wants to be around water. And that makes sense, right? Because we know water is a polar molecule, and polar molecules like other polar molecules. Because remember, if we have a polar molecule of water and it had those slight charges on it, it likes to be around other molecules that have those charges so they can create bonds. Remember we talked about with water when it had, if it was next to another water, right, the negative on the oxygen was attracted to the positive on the hydrogen, and then we get hydrogen bond and we get a bond formation. And so that can happen with not just water molecules, but other molecules as well. So the polar head, it likes water. It's called hydrophilic, and that makes sense because hydro, we can think of water, and philic means loving. So this word means water loving. So if something's polar, it's generally hydrophilic. So the head group is polar, it's hydrophilic. It likes water. It wants to be around water. Now we have our nonpolar molecules are called hydrophobic. They're nonpolar, it's hydrophobic. And this makes sense again. Hydro means water. Phobic, you can think like a phobia, right? If you have a phobia, it means you're scared of something, so they're water-fearing. Nonpolar parts of the molecule here are water-fearing. They do not want to be around water. They want to get as far away from water as they can. So we have a hydrophilic head that likes water and a hydrophobic tail on fatty acids that do not like water. They want to be as far away from possible as they can. And like I said, that plays a real important role in cell membrane formation down here, which I'll talk about in a minute. So one function of lipids, one thing they do for us is they store energy. You might hear like people, bears and squirrels and lots of animals, they put on fat for the winter. And so when you're putting on fat, it's stored in the form of a lipid. Remember, lipids are fat. And so they store fat because it stores a lot of energy. Lipids store lots of energy. They store more energy than carbohydrates or protein can. In fact, 1 gram of lipid, 1 gram of fat, equals 9 calories. 1 gram of a carbohydrate or protein only equals 4 calories. So you can see 1 gram of lipid has twice as many calories as 1 gram of carbohydrate or protein. So that's how our body wants to store the energy. It wants to be really efficient. It doesn't want to waste a lot of space. So if we can have 1 gram has 9 calories, or if we could do it as a carbohydrate, 1 gram has 4 calories, our body is going to be like, okay, well, I should store it as a lipid because it's a lot more efficient for the space and the weight. Now there's 2 different kinds of fatty acids you notice in the picture that I was writing on up here, and they're labeled. We have saturated and unsaturated fatty acids, and you hear a lot about this on the news and the stores, and saturated fats are really bad for you and you should try to eat unsaturated fats and all that. So this is the difference in structure between a saturated and an unsaturated fatty acid. Saturated fats are generally found in animal meat. So if you're eating a steak or deer or something, generally those fats will be saturated fats, and those are the ones that are not as good for us. They're normally solid at room temperature, and you can think of like butter, right, is solid at room temperature, whereas olive oil and a lot of the vegetable oils are liquids. So saturated fats are solid at room temperature. They're normally in animals, and you can see the molecular structure. It's all single bonds between these carbons here. It's all single bonds between these carbon molecules, as opposed to an unsaturated fatty acid where we have single bonds, but we have at least one double bond. There can be more. There's lots of different kinds of different lengths. There can be more than one double bond. There has to be at least one. And notice that double bond causes a little kink in the tail, or a little curve in the tail, and because of that, that's why unsaturated fatty acids are better for us, and they're liquid at room temperature. Like I said, think of olive oil or vegetable oil. Those are liquid. You can pour them out. Those are unsaturated fatty acids. Okay, moving on to another type of lipid. So these are types of lipids, right? We have fatty acids. It's a type of lipid. Another type of lipid is phospholipids, and this is a picture of a phospholipid. Now these are just a little bit different because we have 2 fatty acid tails right here, so that would be like 2 fatty acids, and then up here is the head group, and you don't need to know the structure. There's phosphorus in here, that's why it's called a phospholipid. And this is the cell membrane. So remember we talked about how the tails of fatty acids are hydrophobic. They're afraid of water. They want to be as far away from water as they can, and the hydrophilic, the polar heads, want to be around water as much as they can. Also remember, we've learned about the cells outside and inside the cells. There's lots of water. It's an aqueous environment. There's a lot of water outside the cells. There's a lot of water inside the cells. So your cell membranes all look like this. There's 2 layers of phospholipids, and the tails both point in and the heads both point out towards the water. So in here there's not much water, and the tails like that. They're hydrophobic, right? They're water fearing. They don't want to be around water. and the heads point to the outside, this would be like outside the cell. This could be like inside the cell. So those heads, they want to be around water, so they point out, and that's how our cell membranes are formed. Called the phospholipid bilayer. I'll write that down here. Phospholipid bilayer. Phospholipid bilayer. And that makes sense, right? They're phospholipids. Each one of these things is called a phospholipid, and bi means two, and there's two layers. Two layers. Another type of lipid are steroids. And steroids are a class of molecules. There's different kinds of steroids. Testosterone is one, cortisol is one, cholesterol is another one, estrogen is classified as a steroid. I mean, a steroid all have this ring structure right here. So all steroids are made from this kind of base ring structure, and then they all are slightly different. You can see like cholesterol has an OH group here, it has this thing coming off here. And so testosterone will have different groups coming off of it, and cortisol will have different groups coming off of it, but they all have this ring structure here. All steroids have this ring structure. Now, a lot of steroids are hormones like testosterone and cholesterol and estrogen, and they're chemical messengers or things like that in the body. That's their main role in our body. And the last one I want to talk about real quick are waxes. Waxes are also a form of lipid, and the way you can think about that is like if you get a leaf from a tree and you look on like especially the top side of the leaf, there'll be kind of a waxy covering on the leaf, and you can go outside and check out a leaf, and most leaves have a waxy covering, and that helps the leaf to repel water, and it also helps them to keep water in so they don't lose as much water. And those are made of mostly saturated fatty acids, so just know that waxes are another form of lipid. Alright, hope that was helpful, guys.